Age of Reconstruction. Let's knock it down. Where is it? Knock it down. Build it back up. Don't you miss it?
Yes. Can I make sure I get your classmates?
Let's go.
Chloe Pearson, Sarah Moore, Kit Kat, Chloe Pearson, Sarah Moore.
No. If you've been chosen, please pass back.
I'm not. I can choose somebody else. Chosen.
Points for creativity. Welcome. Come on in.
I have to stay.
Yep.
You okay. All right. Awesome. I can't go big.
What?
I can't big.
Hey, I have a question. How many points is it if I did not do the back page?
Turn it in and find out.
No, I'm asking.
I mean, 1 out of 4 pages. What do you think? 1 out of 4 pages. What would you give?
75.
Turn yes. Turn in what's up front. Turn in what's up front. That's right. Turn in what's up front.
No, I've done 3 out of 4.
Come on in. Come on in. You got to turn in for what's up front.
I'm good.
Papers on desk. Please pass it back for me. Please pass it back for me.
If you got his papers on, that we got to get my side.
Papers up front. Turn them in. If there's papers on your desk, help me out. I need help. Hand papers back. I always do. Don't knock over Jenga. Never a good idea. Madison's great example of complete notes. I'll take the movie note through tomorrow. We're not starting till tomorrow, but got it. It'd be easier just to get it out of the way. Here, rub my name on that. No, Aquan.
No.
What's up front? Perfect example of what I need turned in. Right, leaves nothing to mystery. It's right there. Actually, I will also take your linking page. What linking page? Yesterday's linking page.
Doritos with this. I think more of them. Swanson, where can I be out the way?
Coach,
How you
see,
doing? Where can I be out the way? How much? Actually, thank you, sir.
Huh? Hey, Mr. We bought that. Oh, it's a little chilly in here. Do you want me to take one of
All right,
these?
check it out. I got 3 turn-ins. Got 3 turn-ins. So let's get situated. First 3 or 4 minutes here.
I'm taking one of these. I'm fingerprinting up.
Real easy to see what you need to turn in. Come on now. Bell rings. I'm going to pull out the paper clip on time this. Got a couple people handing stuff out. Like Haven, who just came in from the bathroom. Come on in. Come on in. Turn it in now. Pull out the paper clip of untimeness. I'm going to take it from you.
Oh, I got it in mine. I just need to write my name.
I love it.
All right, one more minute before I take these papers up.
You have to do this.
I actually did do, I just did mine. You could reasonably get it in 10 minutes, you know? And this is what Pam said, I believe. Like, you're not looking for it's not using technology, you're not doing it. Just enjoy about 10 minutes of our class. 1 minute.
Watch that video.
No, 1 minute till I start.
I'm literally trying
What you got?
Right again back there.
I'm gonna try to do that.
Okay. Your leg, bud.
Believe me. All right, I'm waiting for my passer backers to finish up because they are helping me out. Leading figures of the Civil War, permission slip for the movie, that starts tomorrow. So if you don't have that permission slip today, that's fine. It starts tomorrow.
My mom said she watched that movie.
I can't let you watch the movie without it, right? I can show movie clips, and every now and then I sparse out the language. And this is a movie where I'm requesting, I'm requiring you to have a signed slip in order to watch it. So to watch the full movie, there's violence, there's language. I just want to make sure your parents know before I go there. Now, okay, time to wind it down. Hear me on this. Hear me on this. Phones up. My attention. Okay. This movie, Glory, it uses, one, violence, okay? And I know I've showed clips before that, blood, guts, shots, treated, legs, amputated, whatever. I know I've shown clips of the movie before. Over the duration of the movie, there's a lot. That's why the permission slip, number one. Number two, there's language. Regular profanity, okay, regular. But then I want to make sure everyone knows this. There's some racially charged profanity from the time period. That's why I'm asking you to have a signed permission slip. Don't want to be that teacher that shows you something that ends up on CNN. So with the permission slip, we'll watch the movie. Without the permission slip, we won't watch the movie. Honors class, hear me. You're the only class that's watching this movie, right? If you've ever wondered what's the difference, if you ever wonder what's the difference between the honors class and the regular, we're going a couple steps farther at a couple different junctures this semester. This movie is one of those examples. So we will watch the movie, and here's why. I believe that we can go a little faster in this class. I believe you catch the information and retain it a little bit better in this class. I expect that we can arrive at the same test date, having done more, but with the same expectations for that exam. So we're going to spend 2 days on a movie. I believe it's going to bring the Civil War to life for you a little bit better. And of course, I do still expect you to arrive at the same test date. Now, I owe you a study guide. I've got it made. I'm just going to give it to you in the next couple days. And we will take our test on Wednesday of next week. That's March 3rd. Wednesday of next week. So we're not like slamming into it on a Monday or anything like that. We're going to take our test on Wednesday of next week. In class here, has everybody met Coach Wilson? That's my coach. This is Coach Wilson. I'm not supposed to really point out the observer, but I will. This is Coach Wilson. He's new to our community. Returning to our community, and we're real glad to have him here. You've seen teachers in and out of classrooms observing for 20 minutes at a time. That's what he's doing here. So he's a teacher and a coach, and that's pretty cool. So glad to have you here. Glad to have you here. All right, I need one more helper, and I choose Garrett. Garrett, one to everybody. This is today's notes as we fit into the age of Reconstruction. So first of all, everybody look at my meme and laugh. 1, 2, 3, laugh. The Dorito Locos Taco has outlived the entire Confederate States of America by double. So it just goes to show you how long the Confederacy didn't last. Now, it is amazing how we still talk about this 4-year part of our country's history in depth. Obviously, it's in a significant part. We spent a lot of time on it recently, but it goes to show you in the grand scheme how short-lived the Confederacy was. So you know what? Let's show off for a minute here. Let's show off for Coach Wilson here. Tell me what's on the screen here. How do we get to where we are? What's this?
Blockade.
Blockade, yeah. Called the what?
The choke out
Anaconda Plan, because Sanaa was designed to do what? Choke out the South. What were some key components of the Anaconda Plan?
It's called blockade.
All right, so water blockade. And now this is a sketch from 1861. This is a sketch from 1861, so I love primary source art here, and it does show that the Anaconda is choking out southern waterways. Why do we like ports?
Because you can trade.
Yeah. Why is Russia like Ukraine? Because it's on the water. I'm going to try to bring you some real world a little bit at the end of the hour here today. I know this crowd's probably curious with what's going on in the world today. But just like bring it as to the modern day as possible, I mean, literally today, Russia wants the port cities of Ukraine. The South, losing their ability to use their waterways, would start to starve out. If they can't trade, they can't receive, they can't send out. It's going to starve them out where?
Money.
How? The money. It's always about the
money.
It's always about the money. Okay, so the ports and the blockade, that was one part. What is a really significant geographic feature the southern wanted to, or the north wanted to control? There it is, the Mississippi River. Now, I think this sketch is a little bit too far to the east, right? The head of the snake going into Texas, I think it should bisect the Mississippi River just a little bit more. But hey, they didn't ask me to draw it. You guys know the point is that they wanted to control the Mississippi River. When, where, and who for the north actually seizes the Mississippi River? First of all, let's go with who was it? What general?
Robert.
The other one.
Grant.
Yeah. General Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, at the siege of what? Starting with Vicksburg, Mississippi. There was a significant bend in the river, and that, geography matters. That geographic bend in the river made Vicksburg a really significant town. So Grant seizes Vicksburg when?
After the war.
No. Really significant holiday date. July 4th of 1863, middle of the war, and it comes on the heels of what? Let's connect another.
On the other side, there was
Say it louder. Say it louder for the people in the back.
Gettysburg.
Yeah, right. So Gettysburg in the north, Pennsylvania, Vicksburg in the south, all within 4 days of each other. July 1, 2, 3, Gettysburg, 4, Vicksburg, two major northern victories happening at the same time. What do we call that?
Turning point.
Turning point. This is the turning point of the war. So we showed off a little bit. You guys understand the Civil War. You're bringing a lot of conversation to this. You're bringing a lot of information to this next conversation, which is Reconstruction. So we understand how the South got starved out. We understand that the war split families, split friends. These are West Point classmates. That's actually the famous General George Armstrong Custer. Ever heard that name before? That's Custer on the right. He's a Unionist. He stayed in the North. That is his West Point classmate on the left. The Confederate on the left there, he's a prisoner in this photograph. Does he look like he's being treated like a prisoner?
It looks like he's being treated like a brother.
Like a brother, like a friend. Why do you think that even while in prisoner status, why is he being treated like this?
Because they know each other.
Yeah, because they're all Americans, right? It's a confusing war when we started shooting at each other. And there's plenty more anecdotes of fathers and sons finding themselves on the opposite side of the battlefield, brothers holding each other while dying because they were on opposite sides. So just one of many pictures I could show to show how there was division, amongst friends and families. A couple of statistics, really just round it out, right? We've talked about this before. I just want to show you these numbers. So Civil War, 4 years, north-south. I think we've got the stakes down pretty well. Of all northern males, look at this graphic. Let me bring it to life for you. 1 out of 10 died. Military-aged males, age 20 to 45, you had a 10% chance of dying. If you're in the South, same age bracket, you had a 30% chance of dying in war. So tell me, do you think there was anybody that wasn't affected by death and dying in the Civil War? Statistics like that. Every family in the country was affected in some way. These days, let me make it relevant. 0.5% of Americans serve in uniform. Right? This is not a join the military speech, but it could be. 0.5% of Americans serve in uniform. Very few Americans are affected by someone who serves in uniform. Very few Americans know somebody or are related to somebody who serves in uniform. So things like support the troops and, we're going to roll them out at the halftime show. Very few people actually have a military connection. Whereas in the Civil War, almost everybody would have. For every man who died in battle, 2 died of disease. Goes to show that bullets weren't the only thing that killed. And just on average, if you're to break it down per day, 425 deaths per day, per year, for 4 years. 425 deaths a day for 4 years. Lots of death and dying. Picture's a little fuzzy here, but I think it tells the story pretty well. This is where the dying happened. We looked at a different chart that showed where all Civil War battles were. And, there's like onesies, twosies out in the Dakotas. We looked at most of them happening in Virginia. We'll now look at these bubbles, right? And the bigger the bubble, the more the casualties. So you can probably guess where Gettysburg is. It's in the north. You can guess where Vicksburg is. It's right along the Mississippi River with the bigger bubble. This shows where the death and dying happened. So as red almost covers the whole map, it's supposed to illustrate how much death and dying happened in the war at that time. Some of you know this because you watched my bonus points challenge. What was the total casualty count for the country in the Civil War? Less than 1 million. I'll start you there. Less than 1 million.
600,000.
Between those two, right? I got to say about 620,000 dead in the Civil War. Soldiers. Now we are certainly just talking soldiers. Really impossible to start calculating the civilian count. 620,000 dead in combat. To make a comparison, all of other American wars combined, 648,000 dead. So the Civil War basically matched all other American military conflicts across time and history. And it happened in our own country. We were shooting at each other. And this is the very definition of the Civil War, a war between ourselves. So you might say we messed it all up. Now rebuild it. Ready? You have 2 minutes. Rebuild it. Go. Go. Rebuild. Go, 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 go. Reconstruct my Jenga tower. Work together now. Reconstruct. Reconstruct. Mia's like, I'll let someone else. Madison's not so sure. I'm trying to figure out who's in the Senate, who's in the House. I'm trying to figure out who's a Northerner, who's a Southerner. 1 minute. 1 minute remaining. Oh, a couple more of you want to get involved now. I see. It's like we care about our country after all. 40 seconds. 40 seconds.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Enjoyed it. It's my favorite stuff.
We did it wrong.
He's telling a story.
That's right. That's right.
Is that all blocks?
We used 4.
We had to do
We
it.
made it stronger.
We made it
the country stronger.
Really peel back the analogy here. Okay, good. So, what I hope you remember, I know that was small and illustrative. I hope you'll remember that just as the country tore itself apart, Reconstruction was required to build it back together. Now, there's some irony in how all of that developed, right? I couldn't even plan some of that. Who participated?
Everybody.
No.
Oh, not everybody, right? So in our classroom by itself, I'm not even talking the wider implications of Reconstruction. Not everybody participated. Do you think that in the age of Reconstruction, we're going to see everybody on the same page?
No.
Everybody willing to participate in the same way?
No.
Yeah, remember that. I'm trying to pull a connection here. So we know that you built it back shorter. Why?
Because it's 4. It's
Yeah,
stronger.
okay, so I built it with 3, which is traditional Jenga. y'all use 4 per level, and you're trying to justify that by saying, oh, we built it back stronger. Stronger, but less dominant, I suppose. So I'm not sure the connection I can build back there, make out of that. That's kind of interesting. You guys did that. So just keep my living analogy in mind as we go. I'm gonna try to just drop some definitions on you guys while weaving it into a story at a minimum. Okay, I understand. We had a real dynamic day yesterday. We're gonna try to just round out all of the Civil War today with a good story and with some definitions. So here we go. So at the beginning of the era of Reconstruction, there were 2 main ideas on how to reconstruct the country. One is Lincoln's plan. 2 is the Radical Republicans' plan. So Lincoln has a particular plan in mind about how he wants to rebuild the country. There are those in Congress who have an alternate plan in mind. We're going to look at the differences in those plans. And then, of course, based off of yesterday, what do you know happens to Lincoln in the first place?
He
dies. So is he around to implement his plan?
No.
He's
Skeleton
not.
Lincoln is
And
shot.
that is going to lead to another man being president, Andrew Johnson, to implement his predecessor's plan or to have his own opinion. And either way, the Congress is still there with their radical plan. So here's the variables we're dealing with. Let's see how it actually shakes out. We'll just move right past this right now. So Lincoln's plan is this. Lincoln wants to, and this is called presidential reconstruction. Now, I am going to give you kind of that nice, tidy definition. I'll give you time to write it. But of course, at the same time, anything I say is kind of fair game. You don't have to write down word for word every single slide. That's not the point of the game. But just listen, bring it all together, summarize in your own words. Lincoln, we've studied him a lot, right? You could go real in depth with the case study of Abraham Lincoln.
Is this presidential reconstruction?
We are on presidential reconstruction, more or less. Yep. Lincoln wants to, in his second inaugural address, what was the big theme of it?
To not be mean.
Unity, yeah, right? He could have said, we're winning, we're good, you're bad, go north, boo south. But instead, he referred to unity. He said, with malice towards none, let us all set about the work that we have to accomplish, the healing, binding up the nation's wounds. This plan, you could accurately call it the 10% plan, okay, the presidential reconstruction, and then subset the 10% plan, because he called for a whopping, huge numbered 10% of a southern state's voters to pledge loyalty back to the Union, and then they would be readmitted. 10%. If you got $1, what is 10% of $1?
10 cents.
Whopping dime. Yeah, if you buy anything with a dime. Point is, that's pretty small, isn't it? Would you characterize this as a strict Reconstruction plan or a lenient Reconstruction plan? Very lenient. Presidential Reconstruction is characterized as being very, very lenient. So some of you are circling lenient because that's the interactive notes that I have designed for you. So this is Lincoln's big idea, right? Healing, bind up the nation's wounds. Together, we're all going to be brothers again, a very lenient plan. Well, let's characterize that with the Radical Republicans. The Radical Republicans believed that Lincoln was being too easy on the South. 10%, that's it. How in the world is that going to protect these, if we emancipate the slaves and they no longer have a structure that they're used to, how in the world is this going to protect newly freed slaves? So Radical Republicans and Radical Reconstruction believed that Lincoln was being too easy on the South. They, as the opposite of unity, wanted to punish Southerners. Their big idea was to make them pay for what they did. Radical Republicans were very much on the side of to be freed slaves, right? We can start to use the phrase newly freed slaves, recently freed, freedmen. If I use the word slave, I don't want to imply that they're still in slavery. It's just kind of their previous status, right? Recently freed slaves, that of course means they're a freedman, right? So Radical Republicans demanded civil rights for new freedmen. Now, here's what's crazy about the label, radical. What was called radical in 1865, we would probably just see as proposals for basic human rights. Actually, bring it all the way into the 1960s. Martin Luther King Jr. is going to continue this conversation for probably way longer than it needed to be continued. I personally kind of wish it would wrapped itself up way before the 1960s. But radical demands, really just kind of a call for basic human rights, civil rights, the right to vote, right to education, kind of give them some land and services to get them back on their feet. This was called radical at the time. Lincoln's balancing perspectives, right? He wants to bring everyone back into the Union. In hindsight, Lincoln was not all on the side of to-be-freed slaves. He actually wanted to bind up the nation's wounds, bring the Union back together. We call him the Great Emancipator, but if you really get into Lincoln's personal political philosophy, he was more a Unionist than he was an abolitionist. This is a little extra to think about. Finally, these radical Republicans wanted to provide protection for these newly freed slaves, protection across the former rebelling states by sending Union soldiers to the South. So what they were going to do is set up military districts in the South, militarize all of the former rebel states. Might have been good for law and order, but might have made these Southerners feel like that they weren't really returning to the Union because the Union Army was there kind of governing over them. So this is a contrast. Lincoln's 10% plan, radical Reconstruction, and their plan. This is a little side extra. In fact, this is not on your notes. There is a bill drafted in 1864. It's called the Wade-Davis Bill, sponsored by, advocated by these radical Republicans. And where Lincoln called for 10% of a state to repledge loyalty, this bill calls for 50% of voters to take an oath of allegiance in order to return to the Union. Long story short, Lincoln vetoes it. He vetoes it by not signing it. Okay, not to get too deep into government class, but that's called a pocket veto. He doesn't outrightly veto it by putting his name on it. He just doesn't sign it for 10 days. It's kind of a passive-aggressive way to deal with a particular issue. So he pocket vetoes the Wade-Davis bill, more or less separating himself from the radical Republicans. He, of course, while he's living, he's still in favor of his Reconstruction plan. Well, quite unfortunately, as we know from yesterday, our man John Wilkes Booth changes history, and Lucy Preston doesn't do anything to fix that. Right? Maybe if we were to go back in time and Lucy, Wyatt, and Rufus had saved Lincoln, this whole conversation would be different. Of course, that's not what happened. Because Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson becomes the president. Now, remember the larger plot. Booth's conspiracy also intended to target whom on that night?
The other top two people.
Okay.
The general or that person. And
Johnson was one of them.
Johnson being one of them. Austin says Johnson being one of them. Now, the man assigned to assassinate Johnson is the one who spent the night drinking, lost his nerve, never even went to Johnson's residence. So had the plan worked fully, Johnson may not have been alive to become president. Of course, the plan didn't work out in that fashion. Johnson becomes president. Go ahead.
Did you ever find out that somebody was planning?
Yes, yeah. The whole conspiracy was unfolded. Actually, so Johnson is the one who issues the execution warrants. He's the one who allows the four to hang because he's president at the time. So yeah, he definitely knew the larger conspiracy. He knew that he was rescued in that fashion, I suppose. Johnson comes to office, right? New president. A lot of times he could be called the accidental president. He actually was not anybody's first choice to be vice president. About to blow your mind here. He was from the state of Tennessee. The state of Tennessee belonged to the South. He is a Unionist who belonged to a Confederate state. So he was put on the presidential ticket in 1864 as that measure of unity, right? We're going to bring a Southerner, a Tennessean, onto the presidential ticket. Now, it wasn't an outright Confederate. He was one that believed in the Union, but he's from a Confederate state. Of course, nobody ever plans for the president to be assassinated. Johnson was never supposed to become the president. You could call him an accidental president in that regard, right? He was a drunkard. He was boorish, brash, hard to get along with. He just merely represented a Southerner on the presidential ticket. So when all of a sudden, in an instant, he became president, there was a lot of things to figure out. And he was not exactly a staunch Republican. he was not exactly cut. He does issue his own plan for Reconstruction, although it models Lincoln's. Very similar to Lincoln's. That's what it says there. A couple of things. Johnson called for state conventions to repeal secession. Okay, so that's obvious. You got to return to the Union. His plan was to eventually allow Southern states to rejoin the Union, but he wanted to delay that return for a lot longer than Lincoln was going to. Lincoln, a 10% rule. Johnson did want to delay that return to the South for Southern states to return to the Union. He's going to delay it a little bit longer than Lincoln was. And then ultimately, I'm going to tell you this in more detail, but he was impeached for his disagreements with the radical Republicans. His plan was deemed lenient. The radical Republicans wanted a strict Reconstruction plan. I'm going to tell you all about the impeachment of Johnson here in just a second, but he is the first president to be impeached from office. Not the last, but the first. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Was Lincoln the first president to ever be assassinated?
Lincoln was the first president to be assassinated. That's true. Lincoln was the first president to be assassinated. However, also not the last. As you know, there's several other presidents who were unfortunately assassinated. So with the assassination, some of you are right. I'll just drop a couple more facts. With the assassination of Lincoln, there was an overhaul in presidential security. What you know as the Secret Service was created because of Lincoln's assassination, and still the Secret Service was not able to prevent future assassinations as well. A little bit more about Johnson here. This is just kind of an infographic. From Tennessee, he was a Unionist. He sought to continue the presidential Reconstruction. First president impeached. We're going to talk about all that. So here's Johnson's presidential Reconstruction plan. Former Confederates were disenfranchised for the time being, but they could apply for a pardon, right? Okay, yes, I stepped away from the Union, but as I swear loyalty back to the Union, please pardon me. And the president, of course, holds the pardon power. Here's where he wasn't radical enough for the Republicans. He was not going to hold treason trials. You could just simply rejoin the Union. Whoops, we left, and we're back. No criminal, no crime, no jail, no trial. He was not going to hold treason trials. So this was deemed too lenient by the radical Republicans. Now, for those of you who want a real nice, tidy definition of presidential Reconstruction, if you haven't jotted down portions of this yet, here it is. Lincoln's blended with Johnson's. This is presidential Reconstruction. Lincoln wanted to forgive and forget and allow the nation to heal. That is reflected in his variety of speeches to bind up the nation's wounds, malice towards none. Lincoln wanted to forgive and forget, allow the nation to heal. He asked for 10% to take that oath of allegiance to the Union. Haven't mentioned this yet, so I'll mention it now. You must ratify the 13th Amendment, which granted freedom to all enslaved Africans. And then presidential Reconstruction was going to undo secession. Obviously, seceding states would return to the Union. This is presidential Reconstruction. And you might remember this has been deemed to be too lenient. So I'll give you a second to copy anything you might not have gotten. We're going to talk 13th Amendment at length here in just a second as well. Love Madison's notes, all the arrows and such. You got that last little bit about Johnson being impeached and removed. Not quite there yet. All right, deemed to be too lenient. We're going to find a pause point for our bathroom break. If I need to go back during that time, I will. Let's contrast that with congressional or radical Reconstruction. I'll be calling it radical Reconstruction. I believe GSE, Georgia Standards, calls it radical Reconstruction, but you think it originates with Congress. You could also call it congressional Reconstruction. So here is that super strict version of Reconstruction. Southern states would be put under military rule. Southern states had to hold constitutional conventions and rewrite their state constitutions. Hey, that constitution that you separated with, not good enough, you got to rewrite another one. Southerners who had supported the Confederacy were not allowed to vote temporarily, but that's a pretty big loss of a privilege, right? Loss of a right, I should say. And then here are 3 amendments in a row. African Americans are guaranteed freedom. African Americans are guaranteed citizenship. African Americans are allowed to vote. 3 in a row. I'm going to give you a cute way to remember all 3 of those here in just a second. Presidential Reconstruction only required the 13th. Radical Reconstruction required that states ratify all 3 of these amendments. So you don't have all of these elements of radical Reconstruction. I'll leave this on the screen for just a second. And you should be circling which of the 2 words? Strict. Lenient versus strict. On the back side of your page is 13, 14, 15. Now I'm going to talk about each of them, but if you wanted to write down freedom, citizenship, voting, that's pretty much the key element of each. Freedom, citizenship, voting. 13, 14, 15. So in advance of Chandler asking to go to the bathroom, we're going to pause right there and go to the bathroom. Chandler, it's 12:08. I know you're going to blow me up at 12:10. So we'll just go now. One last slide here. This is summarized, but I believe most of you have kind of already written it down pretty well. So let's go to the bathroom and come on back.
You were. I said that's freedom too. What's up? Hey, oh shit, is that dog? I don't know where my clothes are from. Alright, we'll just do it later.
Radiate. Honey? Who is that? Fit check. Fit check. Sound off.
Elite 8. You know what it is?
Not quite Final Four, but you.
Okay.
Yeah.
one is it gonna be me? It's gonna be printed. Oh. Yeah.
We gonna party. Happy your birthday.
What's up, guys? This is Spark Squad coming at you.
We gonna party like.
Oh, my bad. Hey, no, Chandler, be in my video.
She did that.
So, no, come here, Chandler. So today, fit check. Fit check. Where's your shirt from? No way. Get in the camera. Where's your shirt from? Tell the camera. American Eagle. American Eagle. Journeys. Oh, God, about broke. I got this from my pocket.
Reconstruct it. Go. You got 1 minute this time. 1 minute. Everybody helps. Go, go, go. Everybody helps. Go, go, go. Vamonos. Reconstruct. Hear me in. Bunch of radical Republicans.
Don't talk. We got one block.
Yeah, that was good, guys.
One stand
In 30 seconds.
Oh my God.
Where my clicker at? Someone's moving it. Where my clicker at? Be honest. About the clicker. Where is it? I stole it. No, it was just moving. All right. Radical Reconstruction is strict. So now I'll show you this slide again. Remember, refresher, right? This is the big summary. Lincoln had the 10% plan. Lincoln's leadership might have carried it through. Lincoln's leadership might have healed the country. But what? What's the big but?
But he died.
But he died. Okay. So Johnson, the accidental president, has a chance. Hey, come back to me now. Come back to me. Johnson's an accidental president. He tries to carry on the boss's vision, right? His predecessor, Lincoln, of course, as his own leader, he has his own opinions as well. He comes up with presidential reconstruction. It is seen as lenient, and it is challenged by the radical Republicans. Ultimately, he is impeached. I'm not quite there yet. And then, of course, we have congressional or radical reconstruction, very strict, but it did have the goal of protecting recently freed slaves. So I think we should argue it was a good plan in that regard. Access denied. All right, now leads me to the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. First, let me ask you, what does it mean to be impeached?
It gets kicked out of your
So what was the phrase you said?
He gets kicked out.
Kicked out as president. Is that impeachment?
Yes.
Is it? Is that what we understand impeachment to be? Fired. That's kind of a business word. Is it fired?
No, not really.
Come on,
Hey,
where's
pack your crap
with
Yeah, so impeachment is delivering charges on the president to the House of Representatives. Now, this is pretty fresh information for you all because Donald Trump was impeached twice, right? The most recent president we've had, he was impeached twice. Impeachment is carried out by the House of Representatives, and from impeachment, if a president is impeached, it's not the same as the word guilty. He's not guilty. If he is impeached, the charges go to the Senate for what could be described as a trial. Now, the Senate is not a court of law, but in this regard, the Senate runs a trial. And from this trial, all the senators vote. Now, today, that's 100. At the time, I guess it was 36 times 2, whatever that math is, 72. 72. So all the senators vote. And if there is a majority, the president is guilty. If there is not a majority, the president is not guilty. So that was the 1 minute version about what is impeachment, what is removal.
Does impeachment like mean he's basically fired from office, or he's like guilty of some crime?
I think the better description, because he's not fired, okay? He is not removed. That's a very big distinction. I think the best way to describe it is he has been formally acknowledged that these charges need to go to trial. Almost like being indicted. Fancy legal word, he's been indicted. But it is very different than being fired. Because he is, the charges have stuck to him, but he is not fired unless the Senate fires him and removes him from office. Is that a fair explanation?
So he was not removed from office.
Andrew Johnson, getting a little ahead of myself here, but was not removed from office. This is true. I know that's on your notes, so that's why you're asking which question. Okay, so Johnson here. Here's the deal. Johnson has not made any friends with the radical Republicans. His plan is contrary to their desires. Now, what I think is funny is that he's really trying to carry out Lincoln's plan. I believe Abraham Lincoln would have navigated Congress and would have had his plan for Reconstruction implemented. However, Johnson is not Lincoln, right? Father Abraham has the goodwill of the country. Bumpkin Johnson, right, that drunkard from Tennessee, he doesn't get the same goodwill and good favor. So as he crosses paths, crosses tips, has arguments with the radical Republicans, he makes enemies. When you have enemies in Congress, what do you think they want to do to you? Anything they can to make life hard for you, up to including maybe removing you from office. Well, here is the super tiny thing that gets Johnson impeached. His Secretary of War is Edwin Stanton. Edwin Stanton is the same man who was in Lincoln's cabinet, right? So you can say he got hired by Lincoln. Edwin Stanton was at Lincoln's side when he died. He's the man who said he now belongs to the ages. Okay, so Stanton was a friend of Lincoln, been in office for quite a long time, navigated the Civil War, hand-selected by Lincoln, right? He's a Lincoln guy. Well, Johnson tries to fire him, okay? Because a president wants to build his own cabinet.
I thought he could do that based on.
Well, so there is an act at the time. Austin says, well, can't you do that? Can't you fire someone in the cabinet? Today, yes. At the time, no. There's an act called the Tenure of Office Act. That is fancy words for you can't be fired. Okay, I'll just summarize it like that. Tenure of Office Act means you can't fire federal officials in the cabinet. Johnson trying to fire Stanton technically is in violation of the Tenure of Office Act, right? All things considered, he is violating that law. Because he violated a law, the radical Republicans bring him up on charges, violating a federal law, attempting to fire Secretary of War Stanton, and Johnson is impeached by the House of Representatives. Impeached, level 1. Because he's impeached, his charges go to the Senate. Long story short, it's really fascinating, and someday you'll want to read about it, just like I do late at night. Andrew Johnson was protected from removal by this many votes. What am I holding up?
1.
He was protected from removal by 1 vote. He was not removed. If that vote had gone the other direction, he would have been removed. So one man cast that last vote, and this man basically said, I do not believe it'll be best for the country to remove the president right now. He voted against removal. Andrew Johnson is rescued from removal. So impeached but not removed. He is not reelected. The next president becomes Ulysses S. Grant, and we move on from Andrew Johnson. So that's the brief story of why Johnson was impeached. You need to remember the Tenure of Office Act. He made enemies with the radical Republicans. He was impeached, but not removed. That kind of summarizes the sad saga of Andrew Johnson. Yes, sir.
I really thought it's been more interesting.
Hang on, I'm on thrift right now.
Ulysses Grant, and then they try to kill him too.
So the next president becomes Grant. No, he was never
I
never an attempted assassination on Grant. Good question. What y'all got? You just want me to go back? Huh? Tenure of Office Act. It's in blue right there. Tenure of Office Act. Okay. Yeah. That phrase is difficult to understand. Okay. Tenure means that you're invested in your job. You can't be removed from your job. A lot of times college professors are given tenure. Tenure of Office Act. Not 10 years, but Tenure of Office Act. Here's back to this next one, Marley. Impeached by the House, saved from removal by 1 vote in the Senate. So That kind of rounds out your Andrew Johnson conversation. I hope you see that on your notes. I've been giving you a photograph of each of these presidents. You're filing these notes in order. You got yourself a pretty good U.S. history portfolio going on so far. All right, moving on to life during Reconstruction. What was life like in the South as we were trying to rebuild it? So here's two simple vocabs for you. Carpetbaggers and scalawags. Carpetbagger is someone who left the North, headed to the South, and they were basically trying to exploit the situation for financial gain. I'm going to leave the North. There's a lot of opportunity in the South. I'm going to make as much money as I can while it's crazy down there. Reason they're called carpetbaggers, what do you think? How'd they get that nickname? Huh? They carried all their possessions in a suitcase made out of carpet, right? Nasty old suitcases, not exactly how we make them today, but literally a bag of carpet, all their possessions, not much unlike the cartoon there, right? Just carry all the possessions you own in a carpet bag, head from head from north to south. This phrase is still used today, okay? A lot of people who go retire in Florida come from the north, and when you have a northerner who's hanging out in Florida, a lot of native Floridans will call them a carpetbagger, or just really anyone that comes from the north to settle in the south. Sometimes it's a semi-derogatory term. I wouldn't go slinging this term around, but to call them a carpetbagger is to say they're not from around here. Scalawag refers to a southerner, but they are southerners who were in cahoots with the carpetbaggers. Southerners who maybe they supported the Union, maybe they were for Reconstruction, but mostly they were also in it for themselves. They assisted the carpetbaggers. They made money on behalf of the carpetbaggers' work. So a scalawag is anyone who collaborated with carpetbaggers. Derogatory term for kind of a sellout, right? Benedict Arnold, phrase we throw around for a traitor as well. But a scalawag is a southerner, supported the Union, helped carpetbaggers, basically not a true southerner, not someone who was going to support the Confederacy all the time. Scalawag. So these are two types of people in the country at this time. Again, we're talking about life during Reconstruction. Freedmen's Bureau. Now, it should be on the back side of your page. The Freedmen's Bureau. Did I not give it there? Okay, well, just listen. And Freedmen's Bureau is kind of important, so maybe it's worth a little side note. Freedmen's Bureau is an organization that was built to protect the recently freed former slaves. So a couple words here. It was full of programs that were designed to help freed former slaves get back on their feet. I hate that transition. Help former slaves with schooling, jobs, housing, provided them land to actually work on their own. Something really important the Freedmen's Bureau did was reunite families who had been separated by slavery. That's nice. Christy says that's nice, I agree. Remember the episode from yesterday, the black soldier? He was trying to get a notice written, and he wanted to say his wife's name. My wife, Abigail, the last time I saw her, she was in a trading pen in Atlanta. That might be the most information that some of these people had. All right, last time I knew, my wife and kids were being sold to New Orleans, or whatever the case may be. Freedmen's Bureau, part of the radical plan. Okay, the radical Republicans' plan was to set up the Freedmen's Bureau and offer this variety of protections to the recently freed slaves. Conversation today sometimes is, did we do enough to help people who were knocked down by slavery? Should we continue to help descendants of slave families? A word that gets used is reparations. Should we pay money to family that have slave descendant heritage? That's a big political conversation. I can tell you this much. This is history. At the time of Reconstruction, the Freedmen's Bureau was set up in order to help recently freed slaves get back on their feet. Established 1865, education, healthcare, job placement. Yep. Here is a political cartoon that is basically describes the Freedmen's Bureau. So I see three distinctly different groups in this picture. What's one of them? Southerners. Yeah. Where are the Southerners? On the left side, you can see that they're farmers. Maybe there's some Confederate uniforms in there. There's weapons, right? They look pretty aggressive. Southerners on the far left-hand side. What's the other group we see? On the far right-hand side, recently freed slaves, or freedmen, right? You can start to use that word, freedmen. So who then is standing the gap in the middle? The Freedmen's Bureau, since that's what we're talking about. What is he dressed as? Dressed as the Union Army. But at this point, we shouldn't think of it as a division between North and South. We should think of it as the federal government. Okay, this is the federal government standing between these two groups, angry, aggressive Southerners, recently freed slaves. And you know who really stood in the gap for these recently freed people? Who'd that be? Ulysses himself. Yeah, so as a general, he fought on behalf of the side that would ultimately emancipate slaves. As a president, his big life's work was to continue all of that, continue protecting these recently freed former slaves. So Ulysses S. Grant should be really held up as a hero in the Freedmen's movement because he was a president that advocated for these recently freed slaves. Pretty good guy overall. Really spent most of his life advocating for the emancipation of slaves and helping out recently freed slaves as well. So political cartoon, pretty descriptive. Sometimes certain cartoons might show up on an exam, like the EOC. So this is one I like to point out, analyze a little bit. Elections during Reconstruction. We are now seeing, for the first time in the history of our country, African Americans elected to office. This is a group of, 7? This is a group of 7 that were elected to office in 1866. One of them was elected as senator, and that's the name I have highlighted. The first African American senator comes from Mississippi. The other 6 were elected to Congress, which is the larger body. So, election of 1866, 7 African Americans elected to office. Pretty big change in 1 year. 1865, slavery still exists. 1866, we now have African Americans being elected to office. So life during Reconstruction, right? I built it up to say that there was conflict. This is true, but there's also rebuilding that is happening. Just as you've rebuilt Jenga twice, there was rebuilding that was happening. The Reconstruction Amendments, super important. Some of you already filled it out, and I kind of already told you what they were. 13, 14, and 15. And these are the elements of each. Freedom for all African Americans. It makes slavery illegal. 13. 14, guarantees citizenship to all persons born in the United States, regardless of color, gender, religion. So freedom, citizenship, and then finally 15 guarantees all free men the right to vote. So at this point, everyone is free, and the element is that they are men, okay? So women, the vote is coming, but 15 guarantees all free men the right to vote. Freedom, citizenship, right to vote. The cheeky, cutesy way that you might remember this is just by one word each. Free citizens vote. I like to think that now I'm older than 18 and I vote. You're almost there and you'll vote soon. If you're a free citizen, you should vote. So turn that into a sentence a little bit. Free citizens vote. Free citizens vote. I will go back and forth on these slides in just a second. The final way that might really just nail it into your brain is to call these 3 the triplets. 13, 14, and 15. Free citizens vote. These are called the Reconstruction Amendments. They should always be thought of together. 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. If you can remember that single key word from each, you can peel back any other wordy language that comes on an exam. They give you some big old passage and they say, what amendment is this from? Free citizens vote. Parse through the rest of that wordy language. Free citizens vote. The triplets, Reconstruction Amendments, they always go together. I'll pause for a second until I don't see pencils moving anymore.
I got a pen.
Okay, or pens, pencils or pens. Free citizens vote. Some of you have the essence of shorthand. Some of you still like to write every single word, and that's okay. We're almost there. You can see that you don't have any notes left. We've paddled hard through the Civil War. Proud of y'all. You know, we're coming up on the benchmark next week. If you need to reference these at any point ever in the future, where can you find them? Google Classroom. Thank you, favorite student. All right, moving on. Well, you didn't say Google Classroom. If you had all answered Google Classroom, it'd be different. All right, moving on to part of life during Reconstruction was the rise of hate groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Ku Klux Klan began as a Confederate Veterans Club. Okay, that is putting it too mildly. That almost sounds like it's a motorcycle club that met together. Began as a Confederate Veterans Club, but very quickly turned much more angry, much more malicious, turns into a group that terrorized the recently freed former slaves. So it's one thing to meet with your old Army buddies. It is quite another thing to turn into a group that is going to terrorize former slaves. But it does fit their ideology, right? If they fought a war in order to preserve their lifestyle, Southern lifestyle, and of course Southern lifestyle includes slaves, plantations, the act of bondage, human bondage. Well, these Army buddies can't really get together without talking about the good old days. And to take it to the more extreme, they acted on that. They started terrorizing free people, right? Not terrorizing slaves, not putting down a slave revolt, not that that's the right thing to do either, but they were terrorizing free Americans on American soil. This is the Ku Klux Klan. Now, what is really iconic about the KKK? What stands out to you? A lot of times it's the mask. What color on their outfit? White. Yeah, the white. A lot of times it's a pointy hat mask. Let me ask you this. If you're proud of what you're doing, what are you probably not wearing? A mask. So why in the world would the KKK be known for always masking their face? They didn't want to be seen. Yeah, they didn't want to be known. Even if, right, and a lot of times members of the Klan were known, but they were clouded in secrecy. And as long as they wore a mask during the commission of their crimes, it'd be hard to prove who they actually were. So I kind of already said this, but I'll show you these words on the screen as well. They were Southerners who desired a return to the pre-war South. And I want to explain this one word to you because it has been on your booklet. Antebellum. If you break that word apart, does anybody know what anti means? Not anti, but ante. It means before. So ante is before, and then in Latin, bellum is war. Antebellum is before the war. How do you know the word antebellum in pop culture today? Say it again. The band, the Southern country, pop rock country, whatever they want to call themselves, band, Lady Antebellum. Lady Antebellum recently came under scrutiny for the name of their band. Why do you think? Because they're saying we are from a Southern heritage that came before the Civil War. We are from plantation slave owning era of Southern heritage. We are Lady Antebellum. If you want to take the name at surface level, that is what antebellum means, right? It is a return to the pre-war Southern society. So antebellum by itself is kind of implies slavery. It implies a return to culture when there was slavery. So that is why antebellum is somewhat a negative term. That is why Lady Antebellum now calls themselves Lady A. Now you know, right? The more you know, now you know. Here's a picture of the KKK in action. What do you see in this picture?
A gun.
A gun aimed at what?
It's a bear.
Yeah, right. So these are, and what's on his head?
They're being distracted.
What's on his head? A mask, because why? Because he ain't proud of what he's doing. Or if he's proud of it, he don't want to get caught. You don't want his identity to be known. This is just one of many, many, many examples of how the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, would terrorize free former slaves. So obviously up to and including murder. It's a sketching. It's a sketching. For real. What is the KKK very often known for doing? Distraction. Say it again, Jacqueline. Yeah, even up to the present day, KKK is known for burning crosses. Cross is a symbol of Jesus. Christianity. KKK is associated with somehow they try to say we are Christian believing, Bible following Southern people who is the dominant race. That is bad Christianity. Okay, don't fall for that. That is bad expression of the faith Christianity, and the fact that they use a cross is pretty sacrilegious overall. Here's another picture. KKK. They weren't the only white terrorist group. There's another group called the White League, but they bind together to continue oppressing, former slaves or newly freedmen. So this is life during Reconstruction. Some things are getting better. Some things are certainly harder and worse. And I'll remind you again, it is the Freedmen's Bureau who intended to stand in the gap, doing the best they could to separate the former Confederates and the newly freed slaves. So Freedmen's Bureau. Here is an advertisement for the KKK in the modern day. I hate to have to say to you that the KKK is still alive and well today. It is much less followed, or they have a lot fewer followers than they used to. But the KKK is still alive and well today, and that's pretty unfortunate. So I'll give to you, young people, you got a choice to make. You're going to allow this in your world, or you're going to make choices to stomp it out. Right? I'll give that to you. It's a big idea. Moving on. This one is on your notes. Okay, I missed Freedmen's Bureau, I guess. Black codes. So first, let me grab this definition for you. Yeah, that's what it is. Black codes were laws passed in the South to limit the rights of African Americans. Laws passed in the South to limit the rights of African Americans, because if the Constitution now has 3 amendments that say African Americans are free, African Americans are citizens, and all free men can vote, free citizens vote, black codes are an attempt to get around those constitutional amendments. Yes, Chandler has a great, perfect example of it. Chandler, we say that a little louder for everybody? That's right. So the law isn't that African Americans can't vote. The law becomes you are not allowed to vote unless you pass a literacy test, unless you can prove that you can read or write. Or another way around it, Chrissy, say it louder. She said pay to vote, and that's called poll tax. The law isn't that African Americans can't vote. The law is that you have to pay a poll tax to vote. So it wasn't like they weren't laws that directly targeted African Americans. However, they were laws that specifically made it more difficult. So I skipped a statement here. I want to move on to this. They undermined the right to vote. They forced the payment of poll taxes. They limited the ability for free slaves, or rather former slaves, to own property and own land. So very difficult time, or a series of laws that specifically targeted African Americans. Now, who else might have been caught up in this literacy test? Who else might not have passed the literacy test? Austin says dumb white people. Let me rephrase that with undereducated white farmers. Yeah, right? Who else might not have had enough money to pay a poll tax? Farmers, or white people. Yeah, poor white people, right? Now, so let me round this one out. There were ways to get around the poll tax. If your grandfather was allowed to vote, you were brought into the right to vote because your grandfather was allowed to vote. That's called a grandfather clause. Point is, some white people, poor or undereducated, they got around the poll tax and the literacy test because of their family legacy. Point is, the black codes were specifically targeted at recently freed slaves to get around the constitutional amendments that gave them the right to vote. These are black codes. Black codes. Another very difficult part about Reconstruction America, difficult part of life, is called sharecropping. Sharecropping is not all that different from slavery. Sharecropping may sound appealing, but it's basically the same thing as slavery. Former slaves very often returned to the land that they worked while in bondage. The difference is they were given housing and food in exchange for working on the land. The difference is they were given housing and food in exchange for working the land. Now, do they get beat? Not in the same way that when they're in bondage. Okay, not exactly the same. But the trade-off wasn't that drastic. Slavery, you're in bondage. Exactly. Slaves. Exactly. So what difference? What's the difference? It was one more way that white plantation owners used African American labor to gain for themselves and still hold down the African Americans.
I thought they paid the sheriff.
Now, officers, sometimes the slaves would get a very small amount of the land they worked as their own. Like if you work this field, let's say it's 10 acres, 9 acres of cotton would go to the owner, 1 acre of cotton would go to the slave family. So it's not much better than slavery. Okay, very similar to slavery. Small differences. Are you in bondage? Are you getting beat? Are you getting sold? No. But the take is it was still harsh conditions, and it was not that much different from slavery. Real quick here, we kind of already talked this. How did former generals fit into Reconstruction? Well, Robert E. Lee, he urged Southerners to reconcile. He was in favor of returning to the Union and getting on with life. And I already told you he went on to serve as the president of a college, Washington College. Today is called Washington and Lee College. General Grant, he's elected president after Andrew Johnson, and he spends his life work as president. He advocates for the rights of the newly freed. So we've kind of already talked about that. I just wanted to refresh you on what these two men did in Reconstruction. Leads us to the end of Reconstruction. Somebody clap, because we're at the end of the Civil War. All right, we're at the end of our unit, basically. Not quite there yet. We got one more election. The election of 1876 pits Republican Rutherford B. Hayes. That's the picture that's on your page. Rutherford B. Hayes versus Democrat Samuel Tilden. Okay, not that, those two names. Those are the two names of the election of 1876. Look at the map here. Look at the data here. Who wins the election?
No, the same time.
So look at the popular vote. Look at the numbers. Look at the colors. Yeah. So tell me about the long and illustrious history of President Tilden.
I don't know.
Oh, we don't have a President Tilden. How come we don't have a President Tilden?
Because he lost the election.
It looks like he won. Looks like he won. Say louder. Christy's spot on. Corruption. So Tilden wins the Electoral College. He wins the popular vote, right? I kind of led you to the point that we don't have a President Tilden. We should, but we don't. Here's what happened. There were 20 electoral votes in dispute. 20 electoral votes that were not settled on election night. Has that ever happened before? Like, I don't know, 2020? Like election night, November 7th, 2020?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It still happens a lot. Well, in 1876, there were 20 electoral votes that were in dispute. Each party, Republican and Democrat, claimed that they won those states. Who do you think was in charge of the county election boards in those various states? Not Tildens, the Republicans. So since the Republicans are in charge of the election boards, the Republicans fix the election so that Hayes wins. Do you think the Democrats just quietly go off, backstage and just let this happen?
Yes.
Of course not, is what Anna Kay said. Of course the Democrats don't just let this happen. What comes of this is called the Compromise of 1877. Okay. What comes of this is called the Compromise of 1877. Right? If the election is our issue, we're going to have one more compromise. Henry Clay's not involved in this one. The Compromise of 1877 says this. The Democrats were basically like, hey, we know you fixed the election. All right? But now, in order for us to accept this election, you're going to do something for us. Republicans are like, okay, well, if we can have the presidency, what do you want in return? Here's what the South says. All troops are going to leave the South. Remember, the federal troops, the Union troops have been in the South administering Reconstruction. So all troops leave the South. Reconstruction is over, but you can have the president. So this is the end of the age of Reconstruction. The Republicans get President Hayes, but the Southerners get the end of Reconstruction. All troops are pulled out of the South. The age of Reconstruction is over. Do you think this is a fair trade?
Yes.
A fair compromise? Well, if you're to look at the political cartoon that's on the screen, what do you think might have been thought about this compromise?
Scandalous.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, the guy in the front represents Democrats. The guy walking off to the White House represents President Hayes. He's walking into the White House, walking into the inauguration. We got a devil depicted on the screen. Is there a phrase in use that's related to a devil and the kind of deals you make with him? Yeah, this was called making a deal with the devil. Sometimes it's called the corrupt bargain part 2. Remember, the corrupt bargain also refers to Andrew Jackson, but sometimes it's also referred to as making a deal with the devil. And the end result is that the real loss here, okay, I don't want to say losers, but the real loss here is that African Americans lose protection in the South with the federal army gone, with the protection that they provided gone. Now, racist, antebellum type Southerners, the Ku Klux Klan, the White League, the Democrats, are free to oppress these newly freed slaves without the Union Army there to stop them, without the government there to step in. So it kind of ushers in a new era of oppression for African Americans, recently freed slaves, former slaves. So the real loss is to the African Americans. This deal with the devil hurt them the most. This is the last of the many compromises that we've plugged into your brain. So as we roll into review, we're going to kind of drill the different compromises. Make sure you remember which is each. One more dose here. This new era of oppression is called the Jim Crow era. Jim Crow refers to a certain type of law, often called Jim Crow laws. Basically, it's a derogatory term for African Americans. A lot of political cartoons of the time period depict a black crow as Jim Crow. It's depicting African Americans. Time where Democrats, the White League, the KKK take power in southern states. The beginning of the segregation of races without the federal government, the Union troops to enforce anything otherwise. And states in the South continue to find ways to deny rights to African Americans, black people. And some of those ways are separate water fountains, separate entrances at restaurants, separate public transportation, like front of the bus, back of the bus, separate rail cars, sports leagues separated, etc. So this is going to take our conversation all the way into the civil rights era. We're going to be talking about Jim Crow and the segregation of races. It all starts here. End of Reconstruction, withdrawal of Union troops, beginning of oppression, called Jim Crow laws. And here are a couple of pictures depicting the Jim Crow era. White and colored drinking fountains, different laundry facilities, different restaurant food facilities, swimming pools, all that kind of stuff. Yep. White and colored. Now, so we are rounding out what is known as Reconstruction, designed to heal the country, but I think we're still a long way away from that. Right? North and South white people, they may be able to shake hands at the 50th anniversary of Gettysburg, but I think we're a very long ways away from true healing in our country. And of course, the rest of our class, the rest of our story is going to be all about that. So before you freak out, you should have. Let me ask, did I leave anything off? No, sir. You all know that. Okay, you're going to hang on to these till tomorrow. Simply going to take it up tomorrow. Pause for me. I kind of pre-speeched on this. We're going to watch the movie Glory tomorrow. It is an Academy Award-winning film. It has some A-listers in it, A-list actors, but at the early part of their career. So you're going to see young Denzel, young Morgan Freeman, young Matthew Broderick, right? And it is a wonderful story. Now there is a certain amount of artistic license. Not everything that you see in the movie. Hey, come on. I'm not talking for my health. Not everything you see in the movie is exactly something that happened in history. It is a very good description of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment and colored troops in the Civil War. So we're going to watch that Friday and Monday. It'll be a 2-day movie. What we're going to do right now, because we have time, we're going to do Unit 2 Book It. So in a semi-orderly fashion, I need you to come and get a computer here and